15 ways to learn more effectively. Learning more effectively gives us an advantage in life. I want to share 15 ways that you can give yourself an advantage today. There are actually 3 ways, or 3 steps, I should say, to learning. There is the encoding phase, where we take in what we're learning and put it into short-term memory. Then we go on to the second phase, where we consolidate, we embed the knowledge that we've got, we connect it to things we've learned in the past. Finally, there's the retrieval phase, absolutely critical, but we need to be able to recover what it is we've learned. It's useless if it's stored away, but irrecoverable. Often, the reasons that we don't learn as effectively as we could are because we fail to give each of these 3 phases the attention that they deserve. So today I'm going to give you 15 ways to tighten up your learning. None of you have got as far as you have without being already effective learners. But we all have room. It's a skill. We all have room to develop this skill to get more effective. So, number 1, why are you learning? Before you learn, the first thing to do is to bring to mind your why. What is your purpose? Learning is most effective when it's effortful. If you're going to engage in something that's effortful and sustain that effort, you'd better have a good why. All of us lose focus, become distracted when we don't have a sufficiently compelling why. So understand, what are the good reasons that you are learning? Why is this worthwhile? How are you going to be able to help yourself and help others through learning whatever it is that you're learning? That's number 1, knowing your why. Number 2, sleep well the night before. When we learn things, information goes into a kind of a temporary holding area called the hippocampus. Doesn't matter what it's called, but it goes into a temporary storage area in the brain. It's only during sleep that that information gets shunted out of temporary storage and into long-term storage in the cortex. Sleep does it. Now, the good news here is that if you have even a siesta in the afternoon, that will improve your ability to learn later on in the day. Some studies have shown people can learn as much as 20% more if they have a siesta than if they didn't. So sleeping during the day, where it's possible, is helpful, but also at night. What I'd like to stress here is that you should not cheat yourself of the last hour of sleep in a vain attempt to get more done the next day. We're still shunting information out of that short-term storage into longer-term storage, even during the last hour of sleep. So if you're a 7-hour-a-night person, that's natural for you. Do not get up at 6 if you can possibly help it. So sleep for your full natural span. It all helps. Imagine you were to learn something. Or let's imagine you were to write a Word document. Okay, you put in an hour to actually write a Word document, and then you didn't bother saving it. That'd be crazy, wouldn't it? It'd be absolutely ludicrous. So we want to make sure that we save effectively everything we've learned and put into short-term storage. Sleep helps us to do that. So we want to sleep well. Number 3, move. Movement helps us to learn in 3 ways. First of all, it will make us more alert and more motivated. It releases chemicals, hormones into the bloodstream, which just lift our mood and make us better able to notice and take information in. But critically, it actually promotes what they call neuroplasticity, which I'm sure everyone on this call today has heard about. Our ability of its brain to change. When we learn things, the brain is changing. Movement helps our brain in 2 ways to become more plastic and to change. It promotes the development of new neurons, but it also accelerates connections, new connections between neurons. So move, if you can, before learning. You don't have to run for a marathon. You don't have to run. Go for a walk around the block, but move. It assists with your learning. Number 4, begin your learning with a question. Start with a question. Now, if you were, say, wanting to plant a field of barley, I understand from those in the agricultural business that it pays to actually sort of dig up the soil a bit, till the soil to prepare it for the seeds that you're going to sow it with, so that the seeds have a chance to break through. We can till our minds and prepare our brains to receive more information by asking questions about the content before we begin to read. Now, the interesting thing is you do not need to be able to answer the question. So let's say you're reading a book about the French Revolution. Say it's a book about the French Revolution, and you're wondering how that might have impacted the relations with the UK, between France and the UK. Well, I wonder what difference that made. But you don't just ask a question, try to answer it. This is the key thing. Have a theory. Well, I think it may have caused this. Have an attempt. It's that attempt at trying to answer the question that tills the mind and prepares it to actually receive the information when you come across it. Because you'll come across information and go, oh, that's not what I thought. But the fact that you asked the question and tried to answer it beforehand prepares your mind to absorb more. Number 5, when you read to understand, not to get to the end. I must confess, at times, if I've got quite a lot to get through, reading wise, perhaps I'm studying, doing a course, from time to time, it will feel like a burden. Oh, I've got to read this, I've got to finish this article. But the objective isn't to complete, to get to the end of what we're reading. It is to be able to digest, absorb, and understand. So read new material with the intention of understanding the significance. What does this mean, what I'm reading about? What are the implications of what I'm reading about? So this is a much slower process. So it means pausing as you come across information. Just as you would chew food to digest it more effectively, I hope, so we need to chew information to digest it and absorb it. So read with the intention of understanding what it is you're actually reading. Number 6, what is new or unexpected as you read? From time to time, as you're reading, there'll be moments when you'll be surprised. You'll come across some fact that you didn't know. You hadn't expected that. That's a surprise. The experience of surprise creates a sort of brain fertilizer, which helps new neural connections to be made. Surprise is very, very good for learning. And you'll perhaps know this in life. You've had they may be unpleasant surprises in your life, which you were not going to forget in a hurry. Or perhaps there have been some pleasant surprises in your life, and you'll remember those too. Surprise is good for remembering things. As you're reading, as you come across those surprising elements, the thing to do is to pause, is to slow down and sort of soak in the experience of surprise. Allow yourself to stay with it, stretch it out. I didn't know. No, really? But that's, what would that mean? Stay with the flavor, the taste of surprise, and you will accelerate new connections, and you'll absorb the information more effectively. Number 7, connect what you're learning to what you already know. This is as you're reading, as you read it, and you come across a new fact, a new idea, well, how is that going to impact some of the things? What does it remind you of as you're reading it? What is that like? We need to make these connections because we can only retrieve information that is connected to something. If any of us try to learn a new topic and we know nothing about it to begin with, it's very, very hard to learn anything. We can't connect it to what we already know. Learning is built on previous learning. So pause as you're reading and allow yourself to dwell on how what you're reading reminds you, even if it just reminds you, oh, that's a little bit like that theory I heard before. I wonder if this may have been relevant 5 weeks ago when I had that experience in work, perhaps. I wonder if that might have made a difference. I wonder how this might help in the future. So allow yourself to think about connections between what you're reading and what you already know. Sketchnoting. Do we have any doodlers here today? Have we got anyone on the call that likes to doodle? Penny, you like to, oh, it's Sarah too. You're a good doodler. Well, perhaps not a good doodler, but you're a doodler. Sketchnoting, allowing yourself to turn the verbal into the visual is a really effective way of learning. We don't learn by simply reading words. We need to touch the words. We need to hold them. We need to manipulate the ideas. So we can do this by sketching either on the book itself. If you've got a hard copy book, give yourself the luxury of drawing tiny diagrams, little cartoon shapes, arrows, exclamation marks. This is much more than simply highlighting. Highlighting is useful, of course, for finding information again in the future, but we don't really learn anything by highlighting it. Wouldn't that be great if we could, I'd love it, if we could just highlight everything we wanted to remember. So instead of that, we want to be drawing, sketching, diagramming, really useful for accelerating learning. A lot of stuff on the internet about this, of course, in YouTube and books as well. Number 9, summarize. After you've finished reading, close that book or shut that browser window, get a sheet of paper and summarize. Actually write. So not type, but write. This uses a different part of the brain. It's going to help embed the information. Write, summarize what you've just been reading about in your own words. So we're not trying to remember, oh, how did he put it? What was the expression again? No. How would you say it? How would you put that into, give it your own flavor, your own spin? Summarize it in your own words. Then by all means, open up the book again, go back. What did you miss? What were the key ideas that you missed? Close it again and rewrite in your own words. Number 10, mind map your learning. So I quite like to take a big sheet of A3. I do have some apps for mind mapping, but I find it more satisfying to do this just with pen and paper, some different colored pens, and mind mapping, a bit different to sketchnoting. We're taking the core idea of what we're learning in the middle, and we are drawing spines out, arrows out to related ideas. What do those ideas remind us of? How does this connect to what we know? And we've just been joined by someone now. It's a little bit late. Greg, you're very welcome. We're halfway through, but you'll be able to catch up with the recording, Greg. So mind map your learning. Do we have anyone on the call today who is a keen user of software for mind mapping? You are, Penny. What do you use? Are you willing to share that with us?
I use iMindMap. I'm a mad mind mapper. I love it.
iMindMap. There we go, people. That's a recommendation. Does that translate across to the iPhone? If you create it on the Mac, is it visible?
I do it on my laptop.
Okie doke. A lot of mind mapping tools out there. Certainly have a play and experiment. Try using the software, try doing it by hand, whatever works for you. 11, flashcards. I poo-pooed these for the longest time. I thought, what is the point? A flashcard is nothing more than writing a question on one side of a piece of paper and writing the answers on the other at its simplest level. You'll see, I think Kindle often has a section for you to create mind maps in the Kindle setup. When you create a flashcard, simply a question and an answer, the very act of writing down the question and writing down the answer is part of the learning process. So you've started even before you started to learn and embed the information, even before you have started to use the actual flashcards. When you do create flashcards, it's strongly recommended to include sketches, diagrams, doodles on the side of the answer. It will help you to remember. So do doodle. A lot of information about flashcards, of course, on the web. When you use them, the idea is that you'll create them at the end of your reading, and then you'll have a pile of questions, and you simply work your way through them. So I've got one here. How tall is the Eiffel Tower? Do we have any guesses, people? How tall is the Eiffel Tower? What would you say in meters? What do you reckon? You can put it in the chat box or say it out loud. 394, Mark. That's not bad. 330, Sarah. Sarah, I'm giving it to you. You are 6 meters off, which I reckon is pretty good. 324 meters. Julian, of course, I know exactly what you've just done. I'm not surprised either, Julian. Okay, but no, it's Sarah has won the expenses paid trip to Paris. That's in the mail, Sarah. So when we go through our questions, the idea is you'll go through them. And of course, let's say half of them you'll get right. You put them into one pile on the side. Then you repeat the ones that you struggled with. You repeat them. Then you have these separate piles of different levels of difficulty. The idea is that you will have another go until they're all memorable. You know them all. Then you revisit your flashcards the next day, 24 hours later. You'll have forgotten half of it, but you have another go. You have another go. The important thing at this point is that if it's effortful to remember what was on your flashcards, it's a good thing. Effort, it turns out, is good in terms of learning. If there isn't some struggle, what was it? No, I know this. It was something like, no. So effort is actually creating the conditions in which you are going to learn. So do not be afraid of effort in using flashcards. There are a number, of course, software tools to create your own flashcards. I think the most popular, and certainly seems to be the best reviewed, is one called Anki. It's free. It's used by people in all sorts of professions, works on the phone, on the laptop, on the iPad, etc. Costs nothing. When you're creating your questions and your answers, you can include images. And those that spend a lot of time using flashcards say, do this. Use imagery. It's going to be helpful. So you can have images in your answers, perhaps. That's number 11. Do use flashcards. Number 12, teach someone what you've just learnt. Talk to someone. Now, it's ideal if they are in your field, if they understand what you're talking about, but trying to describe something to someone who doesn't know very much about your field is also really useful. So to articulate what you've just learned to someone to a sufficient degree that they get a broad understanding. They need to know the ins and outs fully. But if you articulate what you've just learned to someone and they get it, then that's a really good demonstration that you've remembered your material. And if they're not getting it, okay, this is good feedback. You haven't quite understood this as well as you might. I'm sure many of you on the call today have at times been teachers. As a number of you I see who I know are facilitators. You've stood in front of groups and you have taught them a topic. And it's certainly my experience, and I'll be interested in knowing if it's yours, that I learn material so much better when I have to teach it to others, when I have to express it in my own words, when I have to make sense, when I have to ask questions, when people ask questions, when it's a little bit foggy, they need clarification, and I have to articulate what something means meaningfully. Really useful thing to do. So teach people what you've learned. That's number 12. Number 13, I've got some terrible news for some of you here. I've got a good idea which ones. Terrible news for you. And this was bad news for me when I learned about it. Alcohol is not our friend after we've learned. Now, of course, during learning, this is not advised either. This will not help. But strangely enough, after we've learned, alcohol is a big problem. In one study, they took a large group of people and they were students, of course. They had them learn a make-believe computer language, but it required a lot of thinking. At the end of the day, they were all assessed and they'd scored, all of them, about 90%. Great. They took 1/3 of that group and they sent them off and they made sure they had a good week of good sleep. And at the end of the week, they tested them again. That group scored more than 90%. It turns out that during sleep, information is consolidated, it's wired up, it's reconnected. We learn as we sleep, if we have good sleep. Fantastic. Another third, though, they made them drink 2 shots of vodka in an orange juice before going to bed. Now, if they were a bit bigger, they gave them 3 shots. But if they were smaller, they gave them 2 shots, okay? They didn't have anything else to drink for the whole week. At the end of the week, the people who'd had 2 shots of vodka the night after learning, they scored 50%. Okay, they had forgotten 40%. All right, so that's how much of an impact it had. But they were curious what to do with this last third, and so they gave them 2 shots of free vodka and orange 3 nights after the day of learning, okay? 3 whole nights afterwards. Those people forgot 40%. 40%. It turns out when we learn, during the sleep, we mentioned how that information gets moved out of short-term storage into long-term storage. It turns out new information that's learned is fragile, it's delicate, and it's dissolved essentially by alcohol. So we can be sure that within 3 days, things that we learn, they haven't really had time to fully embed. So the advice is avoid alcohol for several days after learning. Now, the reality is we're all learning things every day. You can't go through a day without learning things, being exposed to, having conversations with people, reading material. So you choose what to do with that information, but alcohol has a big impact on our ability to retain information. That's number 13. I see some tears in the group there. I'm so sorry to have to share that with you. Number 14, mix it up. If you've got, let's say, 2 topics you need to learn, 2 topics you need to master. Don't master topic A and then learn about topic B. Instead, you want to learn a bit of A and then a chunk of B, then a chunk of A, then a chunk of B. This is much less satisfying, but the information gets embedded more effectively. So we want to break up our learning. They call it interleaving. So break up your learning, change the topics, change the topics. Number 14, that was number 14. Number 15, retrieve and repeat. The critical part that most of us forget to do with our learning is to test ourselves. Now, this could be as simple as a few days later or even the next day, trying to remember and write down. Now, what can I recall? What can I recall from that lecture or that book or that talk? What can I recall? Get it down. Or it might be using the flashcards. Absolutely critical we use our brain to create the pathways to retrieve the information. Now, this is hard. Trying to remember things that we learned in the past is effortful. But again, effort is the sign that we're doing the work which is going to embed the knowledge. This is why we really need to have a compelling why, because learning, when it's done well, is going to be effortful. So we need to recall the next day, recall what you've learned a week later, recall it 2 weeks later, maybe even a month later. So I see we're halfway, we've gone through our half an hour. Here are 15 ways to learn more effectively. There's the summary. I'm going to send you all a copy of these slides and this recording, but they're all there on one side. I just want to bring to your attention the book that I read a little while ago, Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. And I see Sally's on the call. Sally, I think it was you that brought this book to my attention. So thank you, Sally. Not all of the ideas that I've shared today are in the book, but a lot of them are. You don't need to read the book, but if you'd like to know more about some of the things we've been talking about, this is the book to read. So before we conclude, I'm just keen to hear from each of you, which one of these, if you were to pick one to begin to implement, to start dialing up your learning, which one would you choose? And you can type it up in the chat box, or come off the mic, boldly and courageously declare out loud if you prefer. What would it be? Which one thing do you think might be most helpful for you to improve your learning? Trish, are you? Oh, you're saying goodbye. You've got to join. Sarah, goodbye. What's new and unexpected, Sally? Yes. Sketchnote. Teaching someone, Simon. Flashcards. Summarizing learning. Yeah, and flashcards, Heidi. People, we are out of our time. So I just want to finish off by saying, whoops, I give talks, as I think you know, on the subject of building emotional intelligence, developing capability in the workplace by building soft skills, resilience, focus, and emotional flexibility. If you work with a charity, if anyone here is working with a charity that you think might benefit from a free talk to augment an event they're running on building well-being or developing soft skills, get in touch. Would you nudge them towards me? I don't charge to run talks in charities. That work that I do in charities is indirectly funded because of the work that I do in organizations. So also, if you are aware of an organization which is running an event and they'd like a speaker on the topic of developing capability, building emotional intelligence, resilience, well-being in the workplace with evidence-based approaches, it'd be great if you'd nudge them in my direction. People, we are formally concluding. Thank you, Penny. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any points they'd like to make? Any thoughts, any observations? Anything you'd like to say?
Just my own experience with learning Mandarin. Flashcards I find to be quite useful, particularly embedded in apps that actually can help you with the spoken word as well as the literal translation in terms of it's just quite useful.
Yeah, fantastic. Greg, good to see you again, sir. And, and thank you for sharing that. I wish I'd spent more time with flashcards much sooner. I thought it was a childish gimmick when I first saw it. But they're simple, but powerful. People, thank you for joining me. Julian, we've just finished. We've just finished, sir. The session has been recorded though, and I will be emailing out a recording of the session along with the slides. I'll be staying on for a couple of minutes. If anyone would like to say anything, have a conversation about this topic, that would be a pleasure. If not, people, thank you for joining me and have a terrific afternoon.